to step aside, and I'm going to let Britt and Kaylani do this interview with Wally Oppal, QC. I wonder what the QC stands for first, and then I'm going to tell them your credential. Actually, I'm going to let Brittany do it because
she's better at it. She's smarter than me.
Oh yeah, okay. So I'm glad that you said it, not me.
Yeah.
But you've done so many amazing things, and I can't wait for everybody to hear what they are. Everybody, this is Wally Oppal right here on Hollywood North Radio, where the celebrities come to play.
Thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure.
And you've been a great friend over the years, a mentor for me, such a great person in my life. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
And Kalani's here with us. She's going to be asking you some questions as well.
Sure.
So,
All right. You guys fire away. I'll do my best to answer.
Sounds good.
So there's, Kalani wanted to talk to you a little bit about what's been going on in the news this week with the Indigenous people and some issues with that.
Sure.
Yeah, a lot of activism, a lot of positive energy and support towards Orange Shirt Day that we just came out of, and yesterday being Red Dress Day, the national awareness and call to action for all these missing and murdered Indigenous women with so many cases that are still unsolved. And I just definitely have to start off by saying thank you so much for the work that you did with some of the original cases of those. So it's appreciated and it's recognized, and I think we need more attention and action like that.
You're absolutely right. You know, the historical mistreatment of Indigenous people in Canada is nothing short of a disgrace. And what's happened to all the missing Indigenous women across the country, and the inability or the unwillingness to investigate and prosecute killers is a horrible stain on Canada's reputation. We did the Pickton inquiry into missing and murdered women, and I heard firsthand from the many mothers and aunts and daughters who talked about their daughters just going missing. And it was heart-wrenching for us to hear all of that evidence. And I always remember so many of the women who came, and I still remember one woman who came before us, and she said, every time I go into a supermarket, I expect she's going to come around the corner. And the fact is, she's been missing since 1998. And so there's no closure for a lot of the women. And a lot of the families who had mothers and daughters and sisters and aunts missing.
So for people that may not know some stuff about you, you were the commissioner who worked on the Missing Women's Inquiry.
Yes.
It was 1,300 pages.
Yeah.
And that was to basically look into the investigations and to make recommendations going forward if these things were to happen again.
What happened, Britt, was that women started going missing in the Downtown Eastside of Vancouver in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and nobody cared about them. Anytime a mother would go to the police and say, my daughter's missing. Ma'am, what do you expect us to do? Your daughter's a hooker. Your daughter's a drug addict. And by the way, why don't you people start looking after your own, referring to First Nations people. And like they deliberately wanted their daughters to go missing. I mean, nobody looks at the poverty and everything else that the women have gone through. So anyway, we heard those stories, and we published a report in which we were very critical of the police for what they didn't do. And so things have changed because they're doing a lot more. They're now investigating every complaint of a vulnerable woman who's going missing.
So if it wasn't for that report,
that's right.
those changes wouldn't be made.
And they redefined what a missing person is, because inevitably the police would say, well, she's 21, she's entitled to go missing. Anybody can go missing if they want. And that's true. But you know what? If you got a sex trade worker who may be addicted, then it's up to society to help that person.
Right.
And so they're doing that now. And so I'm proud of the work that we did. And I'm proud of the women who came before us and told us their stories. And I said that it was gut-wrenching to hear that. And it emotionally affected all of us. And so I'm glad a lot of positive came out of it. But it's come across the whole country, because the Prime Minister then ordered a separate inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women. And so they came back with their report, and now they're talking about compensation for victims of the residential schools.
Absolutely.
And so that needs to be done. It's time that Canada recognize the mistreatment that they did for First Nations. They were here first. You know, the rest of the people came afterwards. You know what? The people that are now opposed to immigration, well, you know, why don't they adopt our... I was on CKNW one morning, and we're talking about racism. And this guy phones up and he says, I don't like these Chinese and Indo-Canadians that come here and they don't adopt our ways. I said, wait a minute. Did you adopt the Aboriginal ways when you came here?
Absolutely.
Yeah, did you learn their languages and their culture? In fact, what we've done historically is get them to forget their languages. They would be punished for speaking their own languages. So, yeah.
And that is the legacy of the residential schools.
Exactly. The cultural genocide that took place.
Yeah.
And so it's time for Canada to recognize that and move forward for that and to compensate those people who were wrongfully treated. So.
I was at a conference recently hosted at UBC, and one of the facilitators was Rhiannon Bennett, who is from Hummingbirds Rising consultation group. And our workshop was themed on justice, diversity, inclusion, and equity, and reconciliation. That was the major theme of our course. And we were just discussing how important it is for us as all Canadians and as settlers and non-settlers and First Nations people, everyone that's living in our country now, to work together. It's not just someone's problem or their problem or your problem. It's all of us, because we're all here together. And in order for us to get past that, we have to recognize the truth before we can reconcile.
Well, not only that, but even go a little further. Why don't we look to see how the Indigenous people were living here before the Europeans came here? And I mean, we could learn a lot about restorative justice and all of those things. That the Aboriginal people got along quite well, and they were doing that stuff, you know. So, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that restorative justice coming from that influence?
Well, it's, you know, as you know, the residential schools objective was to kill the Indian in the Indian.
Yes.
You know, to get rid of their culture and adopt the white man's culture. And the fact is that there was so much more we could have learned from the Aboriginal people, the way they dispensed justice. And, you know, the healing circles. I've been a part of the healing circle when I was on the Supreme Court. And it's so much more productive if you try to bring the victim and the wrongdoer together. And they do that in healing circles instead of sending the person to jail. Because we know that sending a person to jail is not going to be that productive. You know, in that vein, Aboriginal people make up about 3% of the population, and about 24% of the people in our jails. And so, we don't need to put people in jail, and we have to treat them properly and rehabilitate them. So, and if we had adopted some of the justice methods that the Aboriginal people were using before the European came here, we'd be far better off. So,
I think big themes around oppression and looking at the system that we're part of. Right.
Well, it was sort of arrogant of the Europeans to come here to think that their methods were always the best methods. And, you know, the Aboriginal, look at all the diseases that the white man brought to North America.
Right.
So those are things that we have to be mindful of. Yeah.
And how the earth is the state of the earth right now because of those changes.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Go ahead, Brent.
So, to jump topics a little bit, I know you're friends with Trudeau, obviously, right?
Well, I'm not friends with him. I've met him a few times. Yeah.
Anyways, and in the news recently, he's been in for that picture that came up about him
on the brown face?
Yeah, and what is your take on that? I mean,
you know what? I wasn't too upset about that. What he was doing was he was painting his face, acting as Aladdin, but he never said anything negative about brown people, and he's not a racist. And by the way, that's not a real racist issue. You want to get racist? Why don't we do something about the Aboriginal people who've been excluded? Why don't we do something about the brown people and the black people who are excluded from jobs and things? That's real racism. When black people, the African Canadians and African Americans, are not treated properly, that's real racism, and not playing somebody in a play. So I don't I'm not too.
Well, he was
concerned.
at a party.
He was at a
like
party.
A Halloween party.
I know it's a Halloween party, you know. So, and by the way, Sir Laurence Olivier played Othello, and he blacked his face when he did it. So, and that was done, and so I think there are better issues to move on from.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Good.
And so you've also been in the news lately. There's some changes going on with the RCMP and the Surrey Cop Force as well.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about why you're involved in that and what's going on with that?
Well, Surrey has decided that they do not want the RCMP to be their police force. They want their own police force, and they've decided that. So, my job is to organize the transition. So, what do we do? What do we do with the ongoing investigations? What do we do with the ongoing prosecutions? And what do we do about, we have to establish a police board, we have to get a police chief, we have to recruit officers. Where do we get officers from? Where do we train them? So those are all things that I'm involved with. So we're doing that now. So,
Okay.
yeah, good.
And what kind of recommendations would you make in that?
Well,
sense?
I think first of all, we have to recognize that the RCMP historically did a pretty good job when it came to crime investigations. But the complaint that Surrey has is that they want a police force that's more in tune with what's going on in their own community. And that's a legitimate concern of theirs. So we have to work with that.
And so are you still the Chancellor at TRU?
No, I'm not. I did it for 7 years,
Oh,
so I had to
okay.
move on. So,
All
yeah,
right.
yeah,
And
yeah.
what else are you working on now? You're still at Boughton, so you're practicing at Boughton
I'm
Law.
practicing law. I've been on the, I'm chairing a commission in Ottawa on gun laws. Canada wants to change its gun laws. Some of the issues we have to decide is, should handguns be outlawed for all Canadians? Should automatic weapons be outlawed? And so there's a lot of controversy about that. So my commission, my committee's got to give give recommendations to the federal government as to where we're going to going on gun laws. We don't want to do what's going on in the U.S. Having guns available to everybody and look at their astronomical homicide rates. So we want to be more peaceful. At the same time, there are people who are law-abiding who can carry guns and they're fine with them. So yeah. Okay.
Cool.
All right.
Yeah. And my last question for you is, will you ever find an assistant better than me?
No, that was it. Everything's downhill after you left me. So.
That's
Yeah.
all I needed to. Do you have anything else you wanted to ask Wally, or?
I mean, I feel like I had so many, and then I was like just
Go
sitting
ahead.
here in awe.
I have lots of
Go ahead,
time.
yeah.
We have some time still?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I guess just so yesterday when we hung the dresses up, that project was such a grassroots project and started from the ground up from smaller communities. I was going to ask you, seeing the big picture from your different perspective, what can folks do if they want to contribute and if they want to make waves so that it can...
That's a good question. I think we all have to, first of all, recognize the wrongdoings that were inflicted on First Nations communities across the country. And then we have to work with them with respect and reconcile with them and adopt respective ways. And we need to do that because there's still so much racism against First Nations people. And so we have to do that. And I think the governments are finally getting on side on that, but it has to be done in a meaningful way. And so we have to really embrace that because, as I said, there's something wrong with a country where 3% of the population is First Nations and 25% of the people in jail are Aboriginal people. So we have to give equal opportunity. I think what we have to do is we have to put funding into reservations and into the Aboriginal communities, drinking water, housing, education, and those are the things that we really, if we educate enough people, that's a real solution, and I think that's where we have to go.
Yeah, education is key.
Did you feel a lot of racism coming up back in the day from when you were in law and stuff?
Because I'm a
you
brown
were-
guy, yeah, I did, but
I
I,
didn't say that. No.
it wasn't, yeah, but not that much. I grew up on Vancouver Island in a small town, and there were comments made, you get them. Every visible minority gets it, but I sort of lived past it, and it I'm okay. I mean, I'm not okay with racism, but you know, people have to recognize, particularly now, I mean, 45% of the city of Vancouver is foreign born. I mean, we have so many Asians and people from the Middle East and everywhere else that we have to live together if Canada is going to be a productive nation. So yeah,
But how many you as Attorney General,
Yeah.
because you were the Attorney
Yeah.
General at one point, how many Indo-Canadians has there been in BC as an AG? You're the only one, right? Or
well, I'm the second one actually.
You're the
Ujjwal
second one.
Assange was
Okay, yeah.
an Attorney General, and I think what we have to do is we have to get more visible minorities, more Aboriginal people into public life so they can change laws, and that's really what we need to do. Murray Sinclair is a friend of mine, and we were both judges
wonderful.
we were judges together. I was in the Supreme Court here. He was on the Supreme Court in Winnipeg.
Wow.
So I talk to Murray about once a year or so, you know, so he's a good friend, and he's done so much good work over the years, and in Manitoba they've had so many issues with the racism against Indigenous people. So yeah, so you need more Murray Sinclairs.
More Murray Sinclairs,
Yeah,
please.
right, yeah. So yeah, good.
and how does somebody become an Attorney General?
Well, you have to stick your head out there and be prepared to take some heat, and so run for public office, and that's what people like you need to do. You see, run for public office, get elected, and make some real changes.
Okay,
Yeah. Okay.
deal.
All right. Good. All right. Good. Okay. Good.
Thank you so
Okay.
much for coming.
My pleasure.
and,
Keep up the good work, both of
Yeah.
you. Good.
Thank
Really,
you.
really, really wonderful to meet you.
All right.
And have your
Nice-
voice here with us.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay. Good.
Bye, guys.
Okay.
Hollywood North Radio.